And we are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. This is episode 007, but we're not covering a Bond book because we're not that well organized. No, you're here for the Geek Book Club, the club what geeks and reads books that are for geeks and probably by geeks and read and consumed by geeks, and the sci-fis and the fantasy, and probably we're talking about some historical fiction coming up soon too. So heck yes. Heck yes.
Yeah.
So I'm joined as always by my partner in crime, my geek in crime. I don't know what that's the I'm failing at making it sound way more exciting.
It's all accurate.
It's a podcast about books, guys. It can only be so exciting. But of course, I'm joined by Mr. Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce on Twitter. Thanks again for helping me make it through another book in our monthly book consumption podcast show.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. Thanks for this. This was your pick, and thank you so much for picking this awesome cyberpunk novel. It's a great change of pace, really.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that I think this is a really meaty book, and that's literally and figuratively. I mean, this book could have been made out of meat.
Yes.
So and also we got to benefit from some timely timing, in that we were talking about what book to follow up 2 months ago, because we try and have our books planned out 2 months in advance because we're both pretty slow readers. I'm like a 3 pages a night kind of guy before my body goes, no, go to sleep, you have a toddler. So we were looking at our schedule and was like, oh yeah, we should probably get to Altered Carbon. I think I remembered seeing something in the news about that book. And then literally the week before we started actually reading this book, it came out that Netflix had already produced an entire 10-episode television series on it.
Yeah.
So it's not like we were so on the pulse or ahead of the curve. It's just like the zeitgeist of this book sort of enveloped our little podcast book show.
Well, the fates were kinder to us this time around as far as the coincidence, because last month the author died right before our episode. So I'll take this coincidence over.
Yeah, definitely. And Richard K. Morgan, if you ever somehow stumble upon this piece of media, we did not read your book in an attempt to shuffle off your mortal coil.
Yeah, no. Well,
stick around and write more books.
As long as his stack is saved, he's fine.
Nerd. Well, yes, because that is completely appropriate, Andrew, because that's a major point of the book that we're going to be talking about today. So there is the excitement or the buzz surrounding a Netflix property, especially a show as beautifully produced as Altered Carbon, a really interesting 10-episode sci-fi romp. However, we are the book geeks. So we're going to save. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit because we both have a taste. Like, I'm almost done with the series. Andrew, you were saying you were only like 2 episodes in.
Yeah, well, I about I started the series about 3 hours ago. So
okay.
I watched the first episode and a half, enough to get.
So you're not even through the first 2 episodes. We're not going to spend a lot of time trying to analyze the show. We're actually thinking we might try and do a supplemental episode of the podcast to talk about the adaptation. And if you guys are interested in that kind of commentary too, I think that could make for like an interesting adjunct to the main Geek Book Club podcast, is where we could do the Geek Book Club adaptation show, and we could maybe also go through some of our other episodes and look at other properties that have been adapted. I kind of think of it like, if I'm going to rip off anyone, I kind of want to rip off Review from Red Letter Media.
Oh yeah,
do that, but not like actually review movies, but kind of talk about like when a movie or a TV show adapts a book, how that adaptation took place, and whether or not we feel the adaptation was successful, less whether or not this is a really good movie. I think that could be kind of a fun way to break up our shows.
Oh yeah, or who knows? We might come up with an even better possibility for an adaptation that they'll never make. or that too, or like how would we adapt the show?
But we do have some people in the live chat already. I'm seeing comments from Armando G from Board Buddha, who does work with the Board at Work Network, reviewing TV shows and comics and stuff. We're actually looking at bringing him on next month, because yet again, in a nice little bit of kismet timing, we had Ready Player One on our list, and wouldn't you know it, there's this feature film coming out for Ready Player One. So Board Buddha is going to be joining us for that. Hopefully we can also get Enabong Eda back.
Absolutely.
And also Mary P and Ronaldo Gonzalez and Mr. Tech. So, if you want to leave us comments throughout the live show, you can definitely hit us up on our YouTube live chat feed. But if you're listening to this show after the fact, you can reach us around the social medias on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or shoot us an email, thegeekbookclub@gmail.com. And if you have suggestions for novels, or you just want to join the discussion, that's where you can find us.
Yeah. It's where we've got after each episode as well, we always post our video on our Facebook page, and just keeping. I've been putting up some stuff on Instagram here lately, so just keep an eye out for that. But what do you say we get started? We've got Altered Carbon.
Oh yeah, we should probably actually say, we're reading the book, the first Takeshi Kovacs novel. This was published in 2002. The author is Richard K. Morgan. We've sort of danced around all of those little elements and not actually said what they were. But this is a book that was published in 2002. It's so much of modern literature is sort of owing to the celebration of mashup culture. Like next month, we're going to read Ready Player One, and that's a love letter to the 80s mashed up with a William Gibson novel. I mean, it's almost like you took a Girl Talk album, but the parts that supplied the music for that were books and pop culture references. Altered Carbon, it doesn't have anything quite so on the nose in terms of where it's drawing from, I think, in terms of inspiration. But there are definitely moments highlighted by really top political thrillers. There are moments that are inspired by, William Gibson, I think, is a pretty easy author to point to in terms of inspiring the world of this kind of story. And then there's also some just like old school noir, like pulp novel, like sort of trash pulp crime novel, gumshoe detective kind of stuff, which is just is such a fun blanket to kind of wrap yourself up in. It's kind of like the grimy, seedy underbelly of rich people being shocked by terrible behavior, and all wrapped up with just a little touch of hard science fiction for the premise, and also life philosophy for that little bit of science fiction. What does it mean to be a human kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's throughout this world, you've got the main plot that's going on, but also it opens itself up to some really deep questions about humanity and what makes a person even. But yeah, really, as we get in, it really introduces a lot of interesting questions that really get you thinking, that I'm still thinking about right now.
So immediately after that, just the loose summary, the loose plot description, we follow. These are called the Takeshi Kovacs novels, and there are a series of books, that we follow this gentleman through several stories. This is book one, so Altered Carbon is the first story of this series, and it follows a world where, like you were saying, the human consciousness can be perfectly stored and replicated on these discs that live at the base of your skull, at the base of, right where your skull and spine connect. They sort of keep an active record of your consciousness in any given moment, inspired by elder technology, which they didn't get into too much in this book. But I feel that's something that's going to evolve with future books in the series. And so, if your physical body, and these discs are implanted at around 1 year of age, and so if anything happens to your physical body, the information that's stored on that disk, as long as the disk isn't harmed, can be uploaded into another body. And so they call these bodies sleeves. The actual physical corporeal self isn't as important as the consciousness, which is stored on these individual capsules. And so you can do some really interesting things for storytelling there. Excuse me, intergalactic travel. I guess isn't as many. Intergalactic travel isn't as dangerous a concept if you don't actually have to have a spaceship to fly people around. So they have these things called needle casts where you can just sort of upload your consciousness and send it out as like a beam of information, and then have a body waiting for you when you arrive at your location. You can also put consciousness. They do mention this sort of briefly, just put a whole bunch of human consciousnesses into like a satellite and fly it out there and see, just how far it can go and like study the universe that way. Yeah. And you can also exist in a virtual space. So this also plays into a lot of the economic commentary, because we follow a very rich family that has befallen some kind of tragedy, and they're looking for a private investigator, a detective, to unravel what might have happened. And so they are able to afford perfect clones of their original bodies, but poor people just have to deal with whatever insurance policy they might have. And I think that's a scene that's very telling in the show, which I don't think they focused on quite as readily at the beginning of the book, is the notion of a family losing a young daughter, like a very young daughter, but their insurance policy only covered sort of whatever human body was available, sort of resleeving. And so we see like a tiny little girl's consciousness in the body of like an ancient woman, because that's all they had access to. So that's all we could give you. It's like if you busted your smartphone and they're like, well, I can give you a Palm Pilot. It's what we have on the shelf. So that's what we've got for insurance.
Well, and that's scary too. And that's one thing because that was in the first episode of the show that I wish had been more in the book, that they had focused more on that sort of drama a little bit. Just how, let me just put it this way. I wouldn't want to live in this world, even with the immortality.
Right.
It's just,
and that even for, this is one of the, because we've got to we've got to dig into the sort of philosophy of this novel, but even within the construct, we have a cutthroat capitalism at play, which prevents poor people from really creating some kind of immortality. But rich people can create sort of a perfect immortality, where it's not just that their consciousness can live on forever. They will have multiple clones of their actual physical self, so that they can physically and mentally live on forever. And those characters throughout this, who have accrued enormous amounts of wealth and humongous amounts of political clout, are nicknamed Meths in the book, which is short for Methuselah, the biblical reference that, someone who's lived hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Oh yeah, it's over that time, most myths that they've kind of shown, the ones that we see, almost view themselves as demigods, to the point where they've dehumanized everyone else below them. This book is more of in a lot of ways is a cautionary tale for the pure extreme. If a lot of what we see today and the negatives of human nature are taken to their farthest extreme.
Right, because I mean, we've seen other novels that have kind of tackled this too, where wealthy people in a society are sort of primed for outlandish tastes. I'm so wealthy that I can't just exist as a commoner, and I enjoy sport and food and luxury far beyond that of poor people. And I think this book, I think Altered Carbon, does a really good job of taking that thread and following it, the slippery slope argument, like to its farthest extreme, where even though it's still technically against the law to damage, what is it? They call it biological damage or something like that.
Yeah.
It's still against the law to like harm a sleeve, even if you don't kill the person's consciousness. But rich people can kind of get away with it. they'll just pay to re-sleeve the person. It's fine.
Mhm.
So sort of like snuff film for sport or snuff combat, you know, like combat to the death is like barely sating these meths that are hundreds of years old.
Mhm.
And again, I think Richard K. Morgan does an incredible job of extrapolating. Like, we already know that rich people can kind of have obscene tastes today. What if that rich person had been able to accrue wealth and experience for 300 years?
Oh yeah,
Those tastes would be completely like unrelatably outlandish.
Well, and one of the really interesting things is especially the main one we see, Bancroft. So as we get in it, the main character.
Let's start off the inciting incident.
Okay.
What gets us into this story, Andrew?
So we start out. We start on a planet called Harlan's World, which is about 80 light years, I believe, from Earth. And we start out with Kovacs and his acquaintance, who we don't really learn much about, Sarah, and they're basically they're criminals at this point, hanging out kind of in their apartment when they get attacked by essentially their police force, and they get killed right there. That's the prologue. They go up.
Yeah. And in graphic detail describing bullets ripping through their bodies.
Yes.
They're completely eradicated.
It's like I was there.
Yeah.
And so then he ends up he is downloaded. I guess what's the term for it when you're essentially on the hard drive, as it were.
I kind of always latched on to like re-sleeved, you know, when they were transferred into a new.
Well, I'm talking like in between where they're stored digitally.
Oh,
like
DHF, they're digital human freight.
Yes, and so it's unclear exactly how long it's been. I'd say around 8 years, probably ish, based off of what I've seen, what I read anyway. But he gets brought out of and re-sleeved in a different body on Earth, and it turns out it's by one of these rich, powerful demigods, Lawrence Bancroft. And he goes up, he brings them to his home, and he says he wants him to help solve a murder, his own murder. Because the way it works with these demigods or these extremely rich people is that they can they're so rich they can even afford to have a separate backup in case their stack is killed. And he has it backed up every 24 hours. So if you think about, the nervousness of if your hard drive dies and you wonder the last time that you backed it up, with this one, he doesn't have these memories from the last 24 hours, which brings a whole separate spiel about, is that actually him or is it a copy, which we can get to later. But I mean, it's that's really what kicks off the story is he wants to know. The police believe that he killed himself.
Yeah.
For various reasons.
So the police walk in on a crime scene. It's Lawrence Bancroft all alone in his house. A special fancy laser blaster has torched him from the neck up. So he purposely, whoever pulled the trigger on this, purposely lit up, not only sizzled his head off, but also purposely tried to burn out his stack. Yeah. Even though Lawrence Bancroft would have known that his stack was also backed up on this remote needle cast system. And so the police walk in, they say it's a suicide, but Lawrence is re-uploaded into, or his most recent backup. Data redundancy is important, folks. Maybe look at a NAS, home media server. Lawrence his consciousness, his most recent backup is uploaded, and he can't let it go. He doesn't believe that he would have committed suicide, and he now wants to start his own separate investigation from the police who've just written this off because he really believes he was murdered. So he contracts out, and in this time period, like again, there's almost an Ayn Randian style commentary on the nature of government, law enforcement, and corporations, where someone who has been arrested and sentenced to some length of time of incarceration is basically removed from their physical body and is just placed into a server, sort of quiet. They call it getting iced. And they just sort of, they don't really exist consciously, but they can be sentenced for 200 years. And then face some sort of virtual repercussions or virtual counseling or something like that for their penance. So he's rich enough, Lawrence Bancroft is rich enough where he can look through all of these personnel files of people who have been sentenced to, super long incarceration rates, and he finds a member of the Envoy Corps. And this is what Takeshi Kovacs is, a member of this freedom fighting resistance force who at one point also might have been trying to overthrow the main human galactic government. And they're imbued with special tactics and they call like envoy sense, where he's got like extremely high levels of intuition, but he's also combat trained. And so Lawrence finds a suitable sleeve, which is also sort of combat ready. They call neurochem, so that at a moment's notice, the body can also be prepared chemically for any kind of armed conflict or, forceful interaction with an individual. And so Lawrence pays to have this guy de-iced. He sets him up with a contract saying like, hey, if you can figure out who murdered me, then I'll pay to re-sleeve you in a sleeve of your choice and send you back to your homeworld, and your incarceration and your debts will be forgiven. But if you don't, then you're basically just going to go back on ice for, a couple hundred years. And there's this sort of, crazy mythology surrounding this envoy, where people like think of them as sort of, boogeymen that could like infiltrate into any society, jump into any sleeve, never feel disoriented. Because resleeving, if you think about it, you take your consciousness out of your body, you take your body for granted and you cram it into a new body. There could be a lot of acclimation time for that. And the Envoy Corps was all about, immediate on the ground infiltration and operations to overthrow local governments and stuff.
Oh yeah, so, I mean that's really interesting, just the whole thought of that and how that would work in an application with multiple worlds and how you could world hop and all of that. That's something I found really interesting when I was thinking about the premise for the Envoy Corps.
Well, it's I like this flavor. I mean, to kind of tangent here for just a second, I like this modern flavor of science fiction where we take space seriously in terms of distance. Like when we went through The Expanse, the first book in the Expanse series, and the action of that book doesn't leave our solar system, because leaving our solar system is not easy.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, heck, we can leave it, but getting someplace else that's anywhere else that's not empty space.
No, but I mean, like, even trying to leave it. I mean, think about it. We only just recently had like the first man-made object leave our solar system after decades of travel. The idea that humans can casually jump into a beautiful starship, with interiors designed by IKEA with spiral staircases in the captain's quarters and just push a button and like magically travel faster than the speed of light is something we've always, at least in my consumption of science fiction, is always something we've taken for granted. You get around these plot devices by saying hyperdrive or hyperspace or subspace or warp drive or some type of science fiction magic which allows you to traverse those distances. And I really like authors that are respecting some of those problems and writing them into their stories. And instead of that being a limiting factor, it actually becomes something which helps reinforce the story that they're trying to tell. I think the Expanse books do that phenomenally well, where the dangers of space are almost as much of a character as any of the people in the story. And for Altered Carbon, the distance is also compounded by time, where this society has gotten used to the idea that a human could be out of commission for decades, hundreds of years, but still be brought back in some meaningful form. And so you get around space travel by saying, well, we can just send you as data. Like, we can send you faster as data. You don't have to worry about all this, like building ships with life support systems and having to deal with inertia and all that mess. But then also, the issues of time become a rule to push up against, but then also something that all of the characters of the book can recognize. They mention things like, well, maybe, you know, like you've got grandparents, but you're poor. You can occasionally bring your grandparents
Out
back
of
to life
storage.
for like special occasions or something, you know, like, hey, your great 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 granddaughter's getting married. Would you like to come to that? We can pull you out of virtual Hawk and you can come and see the wedding or something like that.
I
You
mean,
know,
that's crazy. Just the thought of you know, well, instead of death, just being whatever, you know, virtual world that, you know, because also the perception of time is different in the virtual world too, which is really interesting that we can get into as in a little bit later. But just the wrapping one's head around the fact that you essentially have immortality in a way, but is it better than being mortal?
right. Well, you know, that's actually one of the things that I think we can chew into right now in the philosophy of this book. So I was reading before we started reading the book, I was looking up notes on it and reading about the author, and people kept calling this a dystopian. And I would say it took me about halfway through the book before I kind of started to latch onto onto one of the things that becomes a major detriment of this premise. Not against the author. I think the author actually does a good job of sort of ushering the reader into why this would not necessarily be such a great thing. Because you could say, like, oh man, you could build in some short-term or part-time immortality for everybody. You don't have to fear death anymore. You could be murdered and still testify at your own murder trial. You know, like there are so many amazing things that come from this, but the con would be having a society where humanity circles itself, where you lose the progression of generations, where you lose that sense of passing the torch, where you can't pass on, um, you know, you can't pass on to a new generation. You will be the leaders, or you will be the next vanguard, or you will take us someplace new, or you will take risks, or you will fail, where everything sort of then gets balled up in this mash of conflicting generations, and where you can have a meaningful conversation with a great 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 grandparent, and what relationship should you have and what meaning should that have is essentially at this point humanity has kind of stopped. Like you can't
Mm-hmm.
really have much evolution as a society beyond this point. So from the point of this sort of elder technology infiltrating and giving people the potential to be immortal, you're basically stuck. And so we very much see sort of a humanity in decay, as
Yeah.
they're
Mm-hmm.
still having petty political squabbles. Religion plays a factor in what social norms you know, dictate behavior, but essentially they're done. Yeah,
Oh
like
yeah.
humanity's capped, and that's
Well,
actually one of the saddest things to think about. It's this like specter that sort of floats, or I think especially over the second half of this novel, as we start getting more into the philosophy, the lifestyle of the Meths.
yeah.
But you know, like the notion that the Lawrence Bancroft basically kind of infantilizes his children. All of his children are decades old. You know, I think
Mm-hmm.
his youngest child is something like 60 or 70 years old. I could be wrong. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I
but as a
believe that's what it
60-year-old
was.
is still acting like a petulant teenager.
Yeah.
You know, like
Well, and they keep young versions of their bodies, like
right,
their children's
exactly.
bodies around to download them in. Uh yeah, oh my gosh. Well, and it's interesting too because this story is told from the point of Kovacs, who's an off-worlder. He's not from Earth. And just the fact that of all of the habitable planets that we know about that we are introduced to in this book, which mainly it's Harlan's world and Earth, that Earth, the cradle of civilization, is the most decayed
Yeah.
society of all of them because a lot of times Kovacs talks about, you know, oh gosh, you have erasure as a punishment, or, you know, here or some other custom
There's a
that's
lot
really
of
alien.
judgment. Like Takeshi has a lot of casting judgment and casting aspersion on the humanity of Earth, and as filthy and as dirty and as unseemly, excuse me, as Earthlings can be. It's also like they're the most conservative and pious and self-righteous and all this.
Yeah.
So it is great that Richard Morgan is able to kind of juxtapose the fish out of water story with someone who is also like the Humphrey Bogart style uh private detective at the same time as he's also like the super soldier, like no fail mastermind, able to infiltrate and execute with extreme efficiency.
Well, speaking of that efficiency, one thing I'm wondering, you know how they have they have all this special conditioning to become an envoy. Well, that conditioning for the premise of the envoy to work has to be all in the intellect.
Yeah,
basically, it all has to be how you think, and that it's interesting because because the whole premise of this novel made me think about your personality, because a lot of your personality can be shaped on your biology, like hormones if you have a hormone balance, you can have crazy mood swings or something along those lines. Like how much of your personality is biology driven and how much is intellect and just pure intelligence. Because one thing I kind of wish that we could have seen a little bit more of, and we saw glimpses of in this, was how your personality changed when you went from sleeve to sleeve. Because you could be conceivably, you would think you could be a different person almost if you went to a different sleeve. Like say if I went into a woman's sleeve, I'm sure that my personality would change over time during that lifetime based off of that life experience.
Are you saying that women and men are different?
What?
You misogynist enabler, you? No, because I think one of the things that's also kind of interesting is we're introduced to obviously sort of a cast of characters, and one of them is police detective Ortega. I have forgotten her first name. But a female detective who was the detective on the Bancroft case who wrote off Lawrence Bancroft's death as a suicide. And not without getting into too many spoilers just yet, we will cover some spoiler territory in just a bit. How Takeshi in the sleeve that was leased by Bancroft interacting with this female detective. Then again, he also has interactions with Lawrence Bancroft's wife, Miriam Bancroft, and his inner monologue running throughout all of this is also sort of directing the audience viewer like, well, if I were in my original biological sleeve, the sleeve I was born with, this would have been something I would have handled in a different way. And you're right, we get these little glimpses of it, but there would have been that really interesting, that interesting idea of like, do they have a vetting process in this society? Say that someone has like an actual neurological disorder, at what point would that sleeve be removed from the rental population, right? Or the replacement population? And what if it is something like a biochemical disorder that might cause something like depression, a neurochemical disorder that might disrupt patterns of thought, or would that corrupt someone's stack or someone's consciousness if it's fed through that? The TV show does one interesting thing. And again, I don't want to draw too many direct comparisons to the show, but they do this one thing where like all of the rich people at this party that Lawrence Bancroft throws show off some of their most prized possessions, and a woman brings a snake that she uploaded a bad person into.
Oh my God.
And how once she tried to remove that consciousness from the snake and put it back into a human, that it had completely wrecked his consciousness, and all he had left were just the snake, the lizard brain remnants. So
oh my God,
this human body that's just sort of flopping around like a snake is what she describes. And so like the show takes some liberties with the first book and kind of explores some of those topics with these little throwaway sequences, these little throwaway moments. And I kind of wish that the book had given us about this, because I think if there were one major criticism I would levy at the book, is it introduces all of these amazing concepts, all of these great hard science fiction ideas, but it's still at its core very much an on the rails film noir gumshoe detective murder mystery thriller.
Yeah.
So all of this is sort of periphery. It doesn't seem to influence your normal detective drama as much as, I mean, because all the things that we would want to talk about are all of the amazing world elements. Like, I think what Richard K. Morgan has done with his very first book here is created an incredible environment, which he then goes on, I would believe, to further explore in the second and third chapters of the Takeshi Kovacs books. I don't feel that he took as many opportunities in a 500-page book. I don't feel he took as many opportunities as he could have to have the story influenced by some of the surrounding world building.
Yes.
That it feels very expository, not getting in the way of the murder mystery or the suicide mystery. Everything else feels very exposition driven, and then I feel like that'll pay off in a future book. But that feels like kind of a wasted opportunity for book one, where you could have maybe sunk your teeth in just a little bit more. And it's something that I think the TV show, the Netflix show, is actually taking more opportunity to explore some of these little nuances just a little bit more.
Well, and yeah, that's one point where I feel, and the way that the amount of heavy exposition and how they introduced all of these ideas in the book, kind of mixed with the noir, I ended up losing some of it, like where I had to go back and reread a couple parts just to make sure that I was catching all of that fine detail.
I think I was like every other chapter. I was like, yeah, I got to go back, because the book is like, this is, I respect this. I respect novelists that make you work a little bit for the story. And Richard K. Morgan, it's not like he's like, you know, kicking you in the gut with everything to like make this experience painful. But at the same time, as you're trying to get a handle on all of the different characters of the story, the different police detectives, because there are several different police officers you encounter, all of the different meths, all of the different agents that they encounter, some of the counter espionage enforcers that Kovacs runs into, and then all of the the unseemly underbelly, all of the nefarious characters, the drug dealers.
There's so many of those. Like every other person on Earth is one of those characters.
Oh yeah, but Earth is also super conservative and super pious.
Yeah, good point.
So at the same time as they're doing all of that, where I don't know, as I get older and I start reading books, when you throw a ton of cast at me, and it really does feel like in book one, he had like a feature film idea for what this would look like. You know, like, you kind of get the sense that he was writing this with with sort of an idea in the back of his head of how he could turn this into a screenplay. At the same time as he's throwing tons of people and exposition at you, he's also throwing a ton of tech speak at you.
Yes.
And there is not a lot of audience handholding for the terminology and the vernacular of this society. And you would think, well, Kovacs isn't from Earth, so maybe you could have used Kovacs as a way to hold the audience's hand. Oh, what do you mean with tetrameth? What's that? And then another character from Earth explains, well, this is a new form of amphetamine that, you know, was developed while you were on ice. No, because the whole point of Kovacs' character is that he's an envoy, so he adapts and acclimates radically fast. So he never asks those questions. Like the normal, you know, like you have the timely white-haired, the kindly old white-haired scientist in a time travel movie, you know, and they always have to have that one dialogue-driven, like, well, time travel is like bending a piece of paper and let me draw a circle. And like, he has to spoon feed the audience why like time is different.
We need Sam Neill in this you know, story is what we need.
Well, we needed that, or like I keep thinking of like a movie like Time Crimes, where the entire movie grinds to a halt to explain to a character who apparently is too dumb to tie his own shoes, like, wait a minute, I've traveled backwards in time, but now I can see myself over there in that other room. What's going on? Like, scientist guy literally gets a marker out. And you see, well, you were here, and then you traveled back in time, and then you go there. I don't want that, because that's reductive and it makes your audience feel like idiots. But I needed something to help with tons of terminology, tons of vernacular at the same time as it's like the entire cast is just like smashed like right in our faces, like everything that's going on.
Well,
So.
there were several times I had to go back and that like characters, it's just, multiple characters who were introduced in the first half of the book, then they came back in the latter half, and I'm just going, oh yeah, I remember you were involved in this somewhat, but I don't remember I don't remember the significance of which person you were in this,
Right.
this thing that, whatever that happened. But I greatly enjoyed the second half of the book as it picked up a lot more, because then those characters were in motion more in service of the overall plot. I'm going to say right now, sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll shut up. You
My
go.
no, it's my favorite character, definitely the hotel.
Yeah, there's something really interesting. So this is again, it's this great idea that I don't completely feel was explored as well as they could have done, or especially as well as they have in the Netflix show, where in this future Earth, this totally sounds like the track that we're on right now. I think it's hilarious that this book was written in 2002, and now in 2018 we're filling our homes with smart speakers. Our phones have these like wannabe AI voice assistance things, and taking it to like the ultimate end in the hospitality industry, hundreds of years ago, in the story, hundreds of years before the story takes place. Why not just make your hotels completely consciously artificially intelligent? They would be the perfect hosts, and we could wire them so that having guests would be pleasurable, like almost like, that's how an AI could get off, is if they were fulfilling this aspect of their programming. Yeah. And so in the book, he encounters this he goes to stay at this hotel, and everyone's warning him against, like, don't go to an AI hotel. They're super creepy. It's like having an obsessed girlfriend or something like that. They're gonna latch onto you. Um, and so he goes to a hotel called the Hendrix, and it's decked out in sort of like Jimi Hendrix style garb, and like that time period of like sort of 60s and acid rock, and that cultural revolution era. And the hotel even has a construct of itself that it was originally coded with, where it describes, a wiry haired, young black man with an afro holding a guitar. It's like the hotel views itself as some sort of Jimi Hendrix style character. But throughout the book, it's a little bit more passive as a visual representation of that, but it's very it's very active in helping Kovacs through all of his shenanigans. This is one of those major departures from the Netflix show, where I guess maybe they couldn't license from the Hendrix estate, or they couldn't depict it. Maybe they wanted to license music and they couldn't get the licensing for it. So instead, in the Netflix show, it's called the Raven Hotel, and the construct is sort of an Edgar Allan Poe type figure.
Yeah,
who helps Kovacs through all of his adventures.
Yeah, I liked from what I've seen. I liked that you actually got to see a little bit from its point of view, because in the book it's all 100% from Kovacs' point of view. So some of the side characters' insights and motivations get a little bit lost because they're not directly observed by Kovacs.
Yeah, because the book is very much written not only in from Kovacs' perspective, that first person perspective story, but I mean it's a running commentary on his inner monologue. We don't inhabit this world. It's not like Left Hand of Darkness, where suddenly we'll just shift perspective and view the world from another character's eyes. Yeah. It stays consistently through Kovacs' inner monologue.
But you know what? If they did end up switching, I have a feeling that they would actually tell us that they'd be switching. They're giving some sort of clue. So,
or, like Expanse, where it was perfectly divided between two main characters' focus. And each chapter was literally telling you, and this one's coming from this character's perspective. Altered Carbon doesn't play any tricks with commentary or monologue like that. It stays firmly, behind Takeshi's eyes. But it would have been nice to have some moments where, again, this is something that I don't want to get too hung up on comparing it to the Netflix show, but it's one of those things that the next Netflix show is able to abbreviate very handily in getting you to some of those story elements by not having you wait for Kovacs to figure something out. Instead, they can just do a scene from the hotel's perspective or the hotel's point of view. And it's okay that we left Kovacs for a moment just so that you could fill in this other expository point.
Well, in the book, I got, in the book, one thing that makes me accept the fact that they have it just as that inner monologue for Kovacs is it does help protect the mystery narrative.
Yeah.
More. Because that's something that's difficult to do once you start going out to other characters that could potentially be involved, because at the beginning of the story, I mean, as you're meeting these characters, anybody can be involved, and so once you introduce other characters into that narrative, it starts narrowing outside of because part of the thrill in any mystery novel is to have the main protagonist who's trying to solve the mystery go through the process and solve it, and the more you show supplemental stuff that the primary protagonist can't see, you start to narrow the imaginative possibilities for a mystery reader as you're kind of progressing through the story, if that makes any sense.
Oh no, that makes perfect sense, because that also, I mean, I think that kind of should lead us back into sort of the next point, sort of unfolding the mystery of this book. We have Kovacs investigating on Earth. Everyone sort of believes that this was a suicide. Lawrence Bancroft believes that he was murdered, and it's pretty quick into that initial discovery that the audience, I think, is on board the fact that something else is up, that this wasn't just a meth who decided to torch his own head, and know that he would also be revived. Like that story doesn't hold water. So Kovacs is on the case. He's on the mystery. And he's using his envoy training to get information out of people, to figure out the lay of the land, to arm himself, get better weapons. And of course, he has a couple really fun fight sequences with other, which I think the combat descriptions in this book are very well handled.
Yes, agreed.
Very clear sense of what's going on. It's to me, it's like, did you remember the first Sherlock Holmes film with Robert Downey Jr.?
Yes, and how he's going through, is it with the boxer, I believe? No, it's
and so he sort of predicts what the fight is going to feel like. This book felt a lot like the written form of how one of those fight sequences from the Sherlock Holmes film would have been sort of like storyboarded.
Because absolutely.
The Kovacs description of what's happening to him and how he's parrying or joining the fight is so direct and so simple and so well pieced together that you're never left with one of those kind of shrug or moments. You can't figure out what's happened or who's been hurt. And I'll always hold it up as like, the first book of the Twilight Saga, where they had to knock out the main character before the climactic battle at the end because the author couldn't write action. Like that's like the bookend of terrible. Like,
yes,
that's exactly the wrong way. Perfect description, wrong way of how not to write action for a piece of fiction. I would say that the descriptions of action in this book are almost the polar opposite. They're near perfect. It's kind of like reading Harry Potter and going through a Quidditch sequence. And somehow in an imaginary game that J.K. Rowling made up, what the rules are, where all the players on the field are, and you get a very clear image in your mind about how that game's going down. Kovacs combat is wonderfully well described. Maybe almost to a point of, like you were saying before we jumped on, maybe almost to a point of it being sort of overly graphic. But it doesn't leave you wondering what's going on. That's exactly what bones are breaking and what organs are being ripped out and which limbs are getting severed. It's all very clear for you.
I found the action writing to be not that dissimilar to The Expanse's action writing, where I had a very clear sense of what was happening, what was happening around the characters. Yeah, that was very strong, and that's one thing that made it very strong for the latter half of the book. with those wonderful fight descriptions, there are some very, very intense, which happens not that much, not that much farther into the novel, where he gets kidnapped by these saltier, less reputable people.
Well, because one of the great things about this story is his sleeve has been picked for combat and interaction. Like this is a tough sleeve, and we later find out in the part of the book that you're describing is that the sleeve used to belong to a police officer. So
And
he already has a target on his back from ne'er-do-wells who have had run-ins with the cops, and he doesn't even know what his sleeves relationship was with these characters.
Well, they kidnap him and they put him in virtual, which they download his consciousness into, essentially, a hard drive, and they run these interrogation programs, which are very graphically, they're described in very graphic detail.
Yeah.
That the author does a very, very good job of getting across absolutely how unpleasant this is, and how this is probably the worst thing that you could possibly be put through. Like, if you put through enough of it, you can be driven insane. Because earlier I was talking about how time doesn't pass by very quickly. Right. Well, okay. Let me put it this way: time passes by differently for whenever you're in the virtual world, which I wasn't sure if you could manually adjust that or not. It seems
yes. So there was only one, because I was wondering the exact same thing, and I reread part of the ending before we jumped into this podcast. And there is one throwaway line of exposition when they're getting their team together to sort of assemble their cohorts for the climactic finale. And one of the people is this really good programmer, hacker style individual. And she describes going into virtual and then at what time rate that she's operating at, so that she can alter pieces of video and then alter communications between different meths in real time. She's operating on a virtual stack, I think, running at something like a ratio of 300 to 1.
Yeah.
But it's literally only like one or two sentences that describe her engaging with this, that you can alter the perception of time in virtual so that you can do things like achieve sort of faster processing of information. It's like it makes the human brain almost superhuman if you think about it. All these people that we have these conversations today about artificial intelligence. What if AI can do these amazing things and then improve itself? And every time it iterates on itself, it's going to be way faster at improving itself than humans can. But in this world where you can shove your brain into a computer, if you could, in virtual time, operate 300 times faster than you currently can, you'd be capable of doing some really incredible and amazing things and evolving much, much faster. But again, it was one of those lines like, if you skipped over one sentence, you missed. That's what they were doing. And there were a couple of moments throughout this book where it's like, I think I missed something important a page back.
I know.
There's something going on that I don't understand right now, and I think I missed a crucial piece of information.
Well, and it's tough too, because there was a couple of points where I was wondering, were they breaking their own rules that they'd set up for their universe, a little bit? But it was interesting though, because what was it? About midway through the book, Kovacs, I forgot who it was. It was Kovacs was interrogating someone, and he was just going, well, I'll just put this program. Oh no, okay. He was kidnapped and interrogated, but then later he ended up getting his comeuppance on the guy who had interrogated him. But he ran that same program that they ran on him, and they said, what was it? Was it 5 days or 6 days virtual time? They would go insane from this, from being submitted to this. But it was only 30 minutes in real time. I mean, that's the flip side of it. But you can accomplish a whole heck of a lot in that time, or you can suffer a whole heck of a lot in that short,
Well, and isn't this funny? Because it's like, this book was published in 2002, and then you look at things like there's the episode of Black Mirror where they do something very similar, where you have a digital construct of yourself, which is uploaded into this server, and then real life IRL humans can control the passage of time. And so they can kind of torture someone by leaving them in a tiny little box with no entertainment, removing their ability to sleep, and then just, you know, like say, okay, well, I'm gonna set every minute to being a month for you, and then I'll see you in an hour.
Jeez. Yeah.
So we took that. I mean, like, I saw that episode and I'm like, wow, what a brilliant piece of science fiction writing. And yet here's Altered Carbon from 2002 that had already done the exact same thing and didn't hinge the entire story on just that one premise. It's just a piece of what this world has sort of collected in how humans relate to each other.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and as the story develops, Kovacs learns that, you know, it goes much deeper into as far as organized crime, as far as the actual murder that he's trying to solve. He ends up going in. He comes across. I'm trying to remember the order of it. He came across. Well, and it's mentioned before. What's the name? Is it Kawahara? I believe.
Yeah, Kawahara.
Yeah. Yes, Kawahara, and it's a throwaway line at the beginning of the novel when he's first brought out. That when he was first brought to Bancroft, and the reason why he was actually name dropped to Bancroft in order to solve this by Kawahara, and Kawahara is originally a Yakuza boss, essentially he was a Yakuza boss from Harlan's world. Which I kind of have a problem with, that most of their relationship happens before the book even happens.
Yeah. And so they have, so you're right. So Rylene Kawahara is another meth who gets caught up or who inserts herself into the Bancroft story. And this, again, it's one of those things, the author doesn't spoon feed you a lot. There are all of these sort of, these comments, these thrown lines of dialogue referencing their past, but they never have that sit down like, well, what you did back on Harlan's world when you killed that person and then also did this other thing and then also affected me, and that's why I'm mad at you. Like they never completely spell out what the relationship is, but we are led to believe that there's a pretty deep intense dislike between Kawahara and Kovacs. And so, of course, because Kawahara is another super powerful meth who lives sort of, well, Bancroft lives on sort of the more acceptable, waspier side of the meth lifestyle in this book. Kawahara lives on the slightly sounds like the dirtier side of.
That'd be accurate. Yeah.
Well, sorry, but just because we understand that there's a relationship there and that also plays into the Bancroft story, then we also are very quickly introduced to Kawahara being a direct influence on what has happened to the Bancrofts.
Well, and I was a little disappointed in the whole Kawahara arc, because she was kind of branded to be sort of the nemesis character for Kovacs, when in reality, when reading the book, one of her lackeys, Cadman, who's introduced earlier on, seems to be, they focus more on their antagonistic relationship than with Kawahara. So it's more of her lackey, to me, seemed to be more of his nemesis character. I mean, gosh, they even go through, there's a gladiatorial combat epic scene that's could be the end of the novel almost, and it would be suitable for that. And that really was more satisfying from that conflict view for me than anything with Kawahara.
So this is I think one of, I got to take it back. My main criticism is certain ideas never get to be explored to their completion, because this book has a very clear and singular focus on the main thriller, the main mystery that it's trying to unravel. And so I think we can let's get into some spoiler territory here, because we have been sort of prattling on for almost an hour now. So we come to discover about halfway through that but I can't remember her first name, Ortega, the police detective.
Oh, let me pull it up here.
That's really, I should have had the cast list up here, and this is. This is the best podcasting ever.
Kristen
Ortega. Okay, back on track. So about halfway through the story, we come to discover that Kristen Ortega had a relationship, a romantic relationship with the police detective that formerly occupied Kovacs's sleeve. And that detective, Detective Riker, Elias Riker, was convicted of falsifying evidence and of a bunch of other police problems. He's a police officer that lived on the edge in this world where, everyone's sort of a shade of gray. And so this is why Ortega has taken such an interest in the Bancroft case, is because Raylene Kawahara recommended Kovacs, and also and Bancroft was looking at compatible sleeves. Lawrence Bancroft was upset that the police didn't take his potential murder seriously enough, so he went out of his way to find something that would irk the police detective that wrote off his death as a suicide. So he uploaded Kawahara's suggested detective into the sleeve that Ortega was trying to protect, so that her lover could eventually be replaced in his own body. And so this is where it gets this is the aspect of the book that I felt became total pulp. Because this was literally pulp noir right there, was the tangled web of lovers and detectives and the rich and powerful, and how Kovacs is trying to untangle this web of other people's problems when he was a former mercenary freedom fighter from a completely different planet.
Well, other people's problems and other people's hormones.
Right. And so when you were describing how he becomes a sort of a different person because of the biological, so the sleeve he's downloaded into, the sleeve that he's sleeved into, was a heavy smoker, and he naturally seemed to have a pheromonal attraction to Ortega that is described throughout the book, that because those two individuals, those two biological entities had been so entwined, that some of that still rubs off on him, and he can't just magically not be a smoker, because that is also a physical addiction. And so throughout the book, he fails at quitting smoking. But again, there's also, because in your mind's eye, there's also that perfect film noir, lighting up a cigarette, trench coat, rainy New York streets. You want that image in your brain. And I think the author finds a way to present that, that classic fedora, trench coat, cigarette, Humphrey Bogart idea in your brain in a future where smoking probably wouldn't be that big a deal. In a world with magic drugs that can do all kinds of tasty things to your brain or to your genitals or to your virtual constructs. I mean, this is a world of perfect vice for anyone to do anything. This character's vice is smoking. It's literally cigarettes and tobacco. Is kind of silly. And that he can't just have the magic what makes you quit smoking drug, or I'm going to upload a special patch of software Matrix style so that you'll want to quit smoking. They had to kind of just tack that in there, I feel, for the for the image of it, for the aesthetic of it.
Well, and what did you think? I guess, how did you imagine Kovacs's or Riker's sleeve? I guess, because I really think that they should have had, as far as visualizing it in my brain, I really thought of the actor and even the performance, really, of Miller from the Expanse series, at least on television. That I thought of that as the perfect representation of Kovacs's sleeve in this book.
So I mean, like, I started reading the book before I watched the Netflix show, and I'm glad I did. I was imagining the guy who eventually becomes, oh, what's his name? He's in the Captain America films, and I think he becomes Crossbones. And just vaguely Italian features, very sort of
Oh yeah.
bulky build, uh, dark black hair, but very rugged, squared off jawline. That's kind of who I imagined. So when I saw the Netflix show, I thought they cast pretty appropriately. That's not exactly who I would have thought of for what they described in the book, but he fits the attitude and I think the feel of the character fairly well.
Yeah, I viewed the character Wrecker being a little less over the toply ripped as he was in the show, because the show, it's like, come on, that can't even be real, well, no, it can, but but
But the thing is, like, that's also one of the things that I think it takes them a little while to untangle in the book is Riker's sleeve, the sleeve that Kovacs is in, is adjusted for combat. He does have neurochem. He does have these upgrades, these biological upgrades that you can pay for, that you can plug into the body. And this is a guy who also, they describe in one part of the book, before he joined the police force, did some sort of mercenary style work with other law enforcement agencies around the world. Like certain countries, like in the United States, there's like a proper UN style peacekeeping police force. In other countries in the world, there are more like, well, we'll just contract out to, kind of like a military contractor style situation.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's where Riker came before he became a detective in the United States. So for him to be kind of jacked made sense. But I can see where you're saying, well, maybe like he was just like a little bit more rundown or a little more Humphrey Bogarty or something like that.
Because when they described him as like he did everything he could to basically hurt his body as far as with his habits.
Right, but that's also why I kind of felt like he would have been artificially enhanced. So like you don't have to earn your muscles, I don't feel, in this world. Like you can, even if you want, inhabit a completely synthetic robot body and just be like a perfect killing machine. I love, there was one line of like, well, they always get food taste wrong in the synthetic.
Like, everything tastes like sawdust.
Everything tastes like sawdust. It's hilarious that even in your perfect killing machine bodies that that you would still need to eat. But we did get a comment here from Board Buddha. Frank Grillo is the actor I was thinking of, who's also in the Purge movies.
Okay.
Yeah, so that kind of, in my mind's eye, that's kind of what I thought. And that dude's ripped. That dude is definitely like cut. And so again, I was already thinking someone who was a mercenary, someone who had invested in neurochem, and someone who looks like they would be a good smoker. Like, I don't know why I'm putting this on Frank Grillo. If Frank Grillo ever manages to find this part of our podcast an hour and 10 minutes into it, I apologize for saying you look like you might be a smoker. But yeah, that's kind of the idea I had in my brain. So I think they got pretty close for the casting of the Netflix show.
Yeah. Overall, it seemed pretty good. I like the art style. There's, of course, while reading this whole book, I've been listening to the Blade Runner score because it just seemed to fit.
Oh yeah. That was a good pick. So, I guess it's worth sort of untangling the rest of the story. Kovacs does an incredibly good job. He's very effective. Who would have thought that the first person narrative of this story, of a special forces, envoy trained, super empath, intuitive detective style super soldier would be good at getting to the bottom of the mystery at the end of the book. It took me completely by surprise. I was like, here's a guy who is amazingly good at his job, and amazingly good at what he does, and he's trained super well, and he's in a combat sleeve with all of these biological upgrades and enhancements. And who would have thought that he would solve the riddle at the end of the book?
Yeah. Well, and do we want to give away the ultimate ending?
No, I don't want to give away the ultimate ending,
Okay.
but there are these great showdown moments between Kovacs and Bancroft. And Miriam Bancroft, the wife, also plays a significant role in trying to deflect Kovacs from the story because she's got to play the classic femme fatale.
Absolutely.
Ortega
She's
also
dangerous
becomes
too.
a distracting element to the story because the envoy are supposed to be these dispassionate, perfect killing infiltration machines. And of course, he develops an attachment with Ortega in part because of the biology of the sleeve that he's in. And that also helps lead him to the end, where instead of being a soldier of one, he realizes that he's stronger with a team. And that team of Ortega and the hotel AI and a couple other people who have been wronged by these meths that play with normal people's lives as if they were little puppets, all kind of come to the aid of Kovacs to help him kind of get the final mystery untangled. And I really did like that. For as many times as we've seen this sort of gumshoe detective story play out, I think Morgan does a good job, a much better job than I was expecting, of subverting where you think the story's going to go, but not necessarily pulling like a Damon Lindelof where the rules don't matter.
Yeah, I'd agree on that. Like in the end, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect the ultimate answer to what happened to Bancroft. I didn't really expect that because I had a lot of different theories going in my mind, and the way it went down, it absolutely did subvert my expectations. It did not. I was wondering if they were going to break any rules because as we were going along, trying to keep track of the rules was kind of tough. But yeah, it really tied it up in a really satisfying way, I would say, and leaving it open enough for the next book that I'm excited to see where they go in the next book. Especially, change of locale with the same universe would be very intriguing to me.
Well, but then also, I think there's an opportunity here to do maybe a slightly better job of what Orson Scott Card tried to do with the follow-up stories to Ender's Game, where space and time and distance become significant factors in the future of the characters that he started with. And so I'm pretty clear, the book makes it very clear at the end that once this mystery has solved, Ortega and the Bancrofts and all of the other people of Earth in this little peak of drama that was surrounding Kovacs are all going to go off and live their lives. It's he has this intuitive sense like this is the final good. Like I'm never going to encounter these people ever again. This is not where my story continues or where my story follows after them. So I think it would be very interesting to see a Kovacs story. What changes in a society 200 years from the point that we introduced the society if humanity is stuck in this cyclical rut of people never really going away, society never really evolving, or if it does, it seems to evolve in very petty or very small ways. So that would be, I think, a fun place to kind of explore how Kovacs, continues to operate in this universe. So I'm actually kind of interested in reading the follow-up books because I think the show has done a good job of solving one of the major problems, the second major problem. I have two major problems with this book. One, the opportunities for storytelling that they took for granted in staying on the rails for the mystery. And two, Andrew, I've got to put you on the spot.
Ooh.
So I'm going to throw something at you here. It's going to make you very uncomfortable. And
okay.
It might even make you a little bit upset. Tears might be shed.
My God.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
You can't be ready. You're not prepared for what's coming at you. This is going to rock the very foundation of everything that you hold dear in reading fiction.
I'm ready.
Takeshi Kovacs. Is Takeshi Kovacs in this first book a Mary Sue character?
Are you serious? I have that down, like in my notes.
the perfect soldier.
Yes!
He is the perfect investigator. He always has the perfect retort. He is always finding the upper hand in every battle that he takes. He beds multiple women.
Yeah.
He's the perfect lover.
No. Not only does he bed multiple women, he beds like the perfect ideal physical specimen.
Right. That's right. So he does.
It goes into excruciating detail of this encounter.
Yes. Oh, so how uncomfortable did that make you? Because the description of sexual play in this book read almost exactly the same way as violence.
I know. Like, I didn't think that it was possible for me to feel more uncomfortable in a book than the book about alien genitals we read last month. So it was. It was excruciating detail, but like I literally had this written down in my section about Kovacs about was he a Mary Sue, because he totally is in this book. Absolutely. Like, even the stuff that happens to him that where he gets tortured, it's not because of an error he made. Right. It's because he happens to be wearing the sleeve that's recognizable. So he's
still able to talk his way out of a perfect virtual torture construct because of his magical mystical envoy training. So there's a point in the book where his envoy intuition kicks in, and I should have noted the page number so that we could actually kind of read through it. But the book starts in his inner monologue starts flashing moments from previous sections of the book, little snippets of dialogue, a memory here, description of an exterior, one of the weapons used, the person that had a camera, and all of these things flash almost like the mystery wrap-up scene that you would put into a show like Psych. So it would be like if you took the character of Sean Spencer in Psych and you also made him the perfect super soldier, the perfect lover, and like the perfect investigator, all wrapped up into one character. And the show, I think, actually does a slightly better job of exploring some of his failings. I don't think the first book of the Takeshi Kovacs series does a good job of introducing moments where there might be vulnerability, or there might be a character flaw, or there might be some type of downside to his personality or some weakness. Everything, even his weaknesses, are the perfect weakness to have to get him out of the next situation that he's facing.
It's really, it became distracting in the latter half of the book, especially when you're just going, I don't even know how he's going to get out of this. Because, well, another thing that bothers me about the Kovacs character, his primary motivation, his main deepest motivation, and I'm not even talking about like his motivation to not get put back on ice. His deepest motivation is the safety of this character that's on ice, the Sarah that he's with at the very beginning of the novel, that is not in 99.5% of the book.
Oh, even more than that. I mean, she has 3 pages at the beginning of the book, and then she's
like
referenced
3 lines.
So Raylene Kawahara, in recommending Kovacs to the Bancrofts to be used, did so because she had access to Sarah's virtual consciousness, and she knew that she could capture Sarah and threaten Kovacs with Sarah's torture. So Sarah doesn't even come back into the story. She's just referenced later in the novel. So she only exists for about a page and a half before she's riddled with bullets. And we don't get to know anything else about her character until at the end, when we're just told that Kovacs has an attachment to her and he wants to prevent her from being virtually tortured into insanity.
Right.
So that's great. But even then, that still doesn't really hamper Kovacs to any great degree. We don't get any particular insight into Sarah, his relationship with Sarah, or why it's so important to him that he save her or protect her from this. And it ultimately helps inform his ultimate solution, where he can get the upper hand on all of these characters that up to that point had been playing with him as if he were like an action figure or a little toy. So I don't think it's so bad that you shouldn't read the book, and I don't know because I haven't read the second and third book of this series. I feel that this will be character fodder we'll get to explore in greater detail as this universe sort of expands. But yeah, in the book, this is one of the things where, for the first time in my geekery life, where I'm going to say I actually kind of like the show better for, one, exploring more of the philosophy of this universe, and two, not making Kovacs such a perfect Mary Sue problem solver in every single encounter that he runs into.
Well, and based off of what I've seen, at least in the first episode and a half, he seems a little bit more ruled by his unruly passions, a little bit like his scruffy nature, as it were. Well, as far as with his interactions with others,
because I still have, I think I have 2 more episodes to go. I'm almost done with the series, but I think they allow him to make more mistakes, to make more assumptions about people, even though he's supposed to be this envoy and he's supposed to be this perfect soldier to infiltrate. He's very good at getting himself into trouble. I think they've written his character in the show to compress. I mean, 500 pages of book is still a lot of material to get through for 10 one-hour episodes of TV. But they're mixing in, I think, more elements of the surrounding literature, the books 2 and 3, some of the more exploring his backstory, his the other characters that he relates to, his sister. Takeshi Kovacs has a sister.
Yeah, apparently.
That in the first season of the show is a pretty big deal. It does not exist in the book at all.
No, no. And then stuff with his father too, because in the book he just kind of in passing talks about his father and how then he leaves. But apparently in the show, there's a
lot more going on.
Yeah,
in the show with his father. So those types of things, I actually feel I cannot think of another time where, being the book geek, I've read the book and really liked the media adaptation significantly better. I think the closest I've gotten, what was it? I think it was book 5. Was it book 5 or book 6 of the Harry Potter series, where the movie just compresses a whole bunch of marking time in the book. And so I feel you ultimately end up at a better iteration of that story.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't believe that this completely ruins the novel, but there were points in the book where I started to laugh that, like, oh no, he's in trouble, but not really.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, you thought I was in trouble, but I actually had the upper hand on you the whole time.
The very end is like that. With the final confrontation is like that. The closest point where I didn't feel that was the case was in the gladiatorial combat with Cadman. That was the best. That was the best action sequence in the whole book, like climax in the whole book.
Cadman is an operative hired by Railene Kawahara to stop Kovacs, the Patchwork Man. See, and again,
that's the best part too. I love
the best part. The little bit of backstory. You know, so one of the urban legends, I guess, or one of the, what do you call those, myths?
Yeah, it'd be an urban legend at this point. I think is the way he described
it. So we get this one little glimpse of Kovacs' childhood, where he's raised on this story of a man who kills children and stitches them together to create this like unholy Frankenstein-like abomination of a monster, who then kills its creator, but because it's made of these body parts, is starting to rot and has to replace the body parts with fresh children pieces. So it's the boogeyman of Harlan's world, where if your kid's acting out, well, you don't want the Patchwork Man to come and get you. And so he captures this operative from Kawahara, and when they interrogate him in virtual space, this operative has been re-sleeved so many times that he has no sense of his own physical self, and it manifests as patchwork, as pieces of other sleeves that he's been in. He doesn't have any sense of himself, and of course that terrifies Kovacs, because here's like the living manifestation of the boogeyman that he was raised on as a child. And so that later, when Cadman gets out of control and Kawahara can't rein in her operative, there's the big showdown between Kovacs and the Patchwork Man.
Well, and it's interesting though, thinking about it, with there's an interesting conflict with his fear of the Patchwork Man, but then also he ended up essentially almost becoming him, because the fact that he's an envoy and their whole purpose is to go into different sleeps. So it's like if he can see himself, if he continued, if he took it to its worst extreme, even, which is nice to kind of see that.
And again, Cadman introduces some storytelling concepts in this world, some of the technology of how they solve the ultimate problem at the end, and Kovacs uses some of those techniques to get to the end. So the thing that I think helps save, even though I do feel that the book version of Kovacs is kind of a Mary Sue, and sometimes eye-rollingly perfect at a time where he should have had some bigger problem or some bigger hurdle to face, is there's not a lot of fat on a 500-page novel. There is a lot of focused storytelling going on here. You are introduced to concepts and to vernacular and to exposition ruthlessly fast.
Oh yeah.
And you get to the end, and there are things that could have been throwaway elements of the story which do pay off for the final conclusion of this mystery. The politics of the planet are extremely important, even though the author does not dedicate a lot of time to describing what's happening with the legislation of religion and with sort of what happens to you after death.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I needed to be an envoy to catch those.
Oh, totally. And you know, like, if you're kind of coming at this cold, especially if you haven't watched the show, I mean, there's a part of me that almost wants to recommend, watch the show first and then see how the book is different. But if you come at this book fresh, now that it's a popular show, and you want to do the thing that we did where we read the book first, there are going to be a ton of moments where you're going to have to go back and reread stuff unless you have amazingly good recall for incidental moments, which feel like incidental moments, and then later on will play a bigger role in unraveling the story. So we did get a question here from Victor Gill in the live chat, and Victor's asking, so can I read the second book, or is it better to read the first to have a better idea of the history? But do the book and the show end the same way in the first season? So the ultimate mystery, again, I haven't finished the show. The ultimate mystery is the same. How did Lawrence Bancroft die? But I would say that there are significant enough differences between the first season of the show and the first book that I would probably recommend watching the show, then reading the first book before going on to the second book. And you can almost use the show as, you can almost use the show as like a Cliff Notes for how to get through the book. And then the things that are different, I don't feel will spoil your enjoyment of the storyline. It's just that you're going to kind of get the storyline in two distinctly different flavors.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the best way to do it. Do it as well. It's with being they don't deviate from what. Well, I've read some differences in with the show, since I've only gotten very limited, not very far into it, but it doesn't. It feels like you can enjoy both separately. They're just different enough where you can enjoy them separately, kind of like The Walking Dead versus the comics.
Yeah, definitely. So we only have the very first season, which follows the first book, but I think introduces elements from books 2 and 3. Again, like I said, I haven't finished the show and I haven't read books 2 and 3, but there's an expanded style of storytelling in the show, which I think is helping the audience get through some of these expository barriers. So I'll be curious to see if, kind of like The Expanse, if this now starts to bridge books 2 and 3. Should we expect another 10-episode run for book 2? How Netflix is going to handle this, because it seems to be doing well enough that this might be worth a follow-up.
I've been reading conflicting reports as far as the how the show is being received on Netflix.
Oh, the reviews for the show make it sound like it's terrible, and it's not. I just think it has some pacing problems.
Right. Well, and one metric that came up to me that was really interesting was drop off, people not finishing, and I wonder if it's because of some of the pacing issues.
I can totally believe that. Not knowing where the payoff is going to go, like around episode 5, I kind of felt like there was some marking time. Like so we got into a couple people in the live chat and like Bored Buddha mentioning Bored Buddha and Mary P talking about Walking Dead.
Oh yeah,
and Victor jumping into that's always game for a heated discussion, bringing up the Walking Dead. Where The Walking Dead succeeded really well when one episode of the show could almost have been one comic from the comic series. And then you got into like seasons of The Walking Dead where it would take 3 or 4 episodes of television to get through what would have been a single comic.
Oh yeah.
Show. There are moments in the Altered Carbon TV series where one episode feels like it's like a third of the book.
Really?
And then the next 2 episodes feel like a single chapter.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
So I do believe that the show has some significant pacing issues in getting us to different aspects of the mystery. But I think if you view it as a 10-hour movie, not as in each individual episode needs to have its own satisfying conclusion, but you look at it, this is just one piece of a greater whole. Even more so than like, episodic television that has a season-wide arc, but every episode of that show needs to have sort of a beginning, middle, and end of the story on its own. Altered Carbon really does need to be viewed as like a 10-hour plus movie. And when you weigh it up like that, some people are going to be in it for that marathon, and other people are going to have difficulties getting over that halfway point around episode 5 to 6. I had some issues if I hadn't been watching it while working out, because like Kovacs is great. So I'm watching the show. What's his name? It's Joel. I've got it right here. Joel Kinnaman, the actor who plays Kovacs. He was also in the RoboCop reboot and House of Cards. First time he takes off his shirt, and you're like, I look down and I'm like, I could be doing push-ups while watching this show.
Yeah,
I don't have to just sit here. So I started watching it while working out, and that helped a lot.
I see. I just solved it. I just solved it so that you can't see anything below my chest. So that's my solution for it.
Good play, Andrew. Good play.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say overall, I definitely enjoyed this book. It was very different as far from any books that I've really read recently, and it was satisfying in the mystery, in the core, and it was also it was the most satisfying thing overall of the book for me was the world building. I'd say it just took a little bit of work to get into the world building. That
to me, I think that's the perfect way to split it for me. The book is so rich for the surrounding trappings of this mystery, and I think the show does a better job of preventing the main character from running roughshod over those issues.
Yeah.
And together, the two actually kind of form a much stronger piece of media than each of them can separately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, same can be said for at least up to a certain point with other shows like The Walking Dead and whatnot that have that supplementary stuff, and The Expanse even to that extent. There, a lot of what we see in media and television now is learning from those past experiences to not discount the original source material.
Yeah.
And to actually bring in those creative minds. Because was Richard Morgan also involved with the production of the show in any way, in an advisory role?
I don't know. I can look that up. I can pull that up on
because I wouldn't be surprised, because that seems to be a theme in a lot of works that are adapted these
I mean, he
days.
definitely has a writing credit, screenwriting credit.
Oh,
He's
okay.
not listed as a producer, which is kind of interesting. Let me read through because there are a ton of associate and executive producers. So that's kind of interesting. The author is not listed as a producer. They didn't want him involved at that level. Not in casting, obviously not editing or production design, art direction, set direction, anything like that. He wouldn't be in second series. Yeah, I mean, it seems like his role was fairly limited just to helping write for the series.
Yeah, was a bored Buddha saying, "Watch The Walking Dead. It's awful." Well, yeah, I stopped watching before Negan showed up. So,
oh man, see, I tuned out after season 2 on the farm, and checked back in for some of the prison against the governor because I really like the actor they cast for the governor.
Oh yeah, he was very good. The
Well,
best.
We fell in love with him in a really funky British series where he played opposite David Tennant in a weird murder mystery musical called Under Blackpool? I think, was it? No. Viva Blackpool. But anyway, yeah, so he's an amazing actor. And so I was like stoked. You got him to play the governor. This is going to be awesome. And then it kind of wasn't awesome and it kind of made me sad.
It may sound weird to say it, but the best parts of The Walking Dead were when children were getting eaten by the zombies. Like for some reason, like if you read the comics,
how do you feel about that one?
No.
Andrew really seems to like children getting eaten by zombies.
But no, like
I feel like we may have strayed a little podcast, and that's something I did not really know about my co-host. So maybe we should leave the Walking Dead commentary right there. But this is what I think is so valuable in the discussion about these types of media, and why I think maybe we should actually try and take a look at discussing things like adaptations. Is when you adapt a story, when you adapt a story, you're creating a new piece of media, you're creating a new piece of art. That to me is an important discussion, is the translation of an idea. So you have a book, and a book can be hundreds of pages, 1,000 pages long, and you can get into things that you can get into detail and nuance, and it's all filtered through the reader's imagination. So the act of trying to create a new piece of art, which is visual and it plays on our auditory senses, is a really tricky is a really tricky dance. It's little things like when I read the Da Vinci Code, in my brain, the main character, I can't remember his name, Robert Langdon. Is that the main character's name? Yeah, anyway. In my head, that guy looked like David Duchovny. My mom said, oh, who I think would be really cool, who would be really fun to play this character in the movies would be David Duchovny. And I couldn't watch the movies because Tom Hanks is amazing, but that's not who I imagined in my, I couldn't take the movie seriously. It's like, that's the wrong actor to play this kind of character.
Yeah, well, and it didn't help that, like in that example too, the movie didn't really live up to the book.
Well, either. I mean, there are a lot of things. That's exactly why an adaptation is so tricky. And in this era right now, what's way more exciting is the notion of the television adaptation of a book or a novel or a comic, rather than the film adaptation. You look at a movie, and I think Bored Buddha could probably school us all better than what we could talk about, but you look at a movie like a Marvel film. Take a Marvel film like Civil War. The amazing scope of the comics for that storyline could never have been condensed into a 2-hour film.
Oh yeah,
that was a publisher-wide storyline touching every single Marvel comic book that was published at the time. There's no way you can sum up how epic and how dirty that story was for Marvel Comics with 8 Avengers. Like, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and one scene of them fighting each other.
Right. And you're like, oh, there's 6 of us at an airport. Let's fight. Oh wow, so epic. So when we get into these things, like, I'm enjoying the Expanse TV show. I don't think it's as good as the book. The Expanse book just touched my heart in a way that I haven't enjoyed pulp science fiction for a while. But the show is really good. And again, there's so many things that I can say, even for some significant pacing problems and some very odd choices in the overall narrative structure of the episodes that I have seen for Altered Carbon. It's really good. It's beautifully produced. It's wonderfully adapted. They've made some smart changes to things that they couldn't have recreated from the book. And it hasn't gotten in the way of the story or some of the depth of the mystery that these characters are unraveling. And I don't think they ever could have done that if this is a film. And so next month's book, I think this is our segue to get out of this episode before we hit the official 2-hour mark. Next month, we're going to be reading Ready Player One. The film for Ready Player One is being released in March. And I got to say, I've got some real concerns over how you're going to take a book like Ready Player One and condense it into a single film.
Yeah. I mean,
and I know Spielberg is an amazing storyteller, and so much of this content is already paying homage to the Spielberg era of films. And that makes me even more nervous that he might be abbreviating some of the most important elements of the story in Ready Player One just so that he can hit a certain time, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, and there's a definite danger with that film of becoming fan service for the medium itself, like bringing in they're a slippery slope with bringing in like Overwatch characters, as long as they're not out of placeedly being out of place and being a major part of the story. That's, you know, versus if they did it maybe in a way that's made it interchangeable a little bit.
Well, I mean, whatever they did, we're gonna find out very soon.
Yeah,
what they did.
Well, it's just generally with a lot of these films, I find there's just a lack of depth.
Yeah,
that you get. So
because I had the same problem with Ender's Game. I don't feel you could properly convey what those children warriors went through in Ender's Game in a single film and not have that single film be 6 hours long. Part of the magic of that 300-page book is you're exhausted along with the characters who are going through this combat training. Ready Player One exists in this sort of 2-chapter storytelling arc as they explore what's going on in this world and the magic of the mystery of that world. And I think it's too much. I think it's too much to put into one 200-minute, maybe 220. I don't know. How long is Ready Player One? I'm going to look it up right now. We're going to see. I'm way far on my list of.
It's something that makes me miss the days of the intermission movies, you know. Let's see.
Oh, it doesn't. I don't think it says yet.
Oh, yeah.
Been released, but we'll see. No, I don't think IMDb has that. But anyway, so I mean, like, let's even say it's 2.5 hours long or 3 hours long. Even then, I still don't know that there's enough time to get into that. So that's what we're going to be reading next month. So you'll want to come back for that. This month, we just wrapped up Altered Carbon, and we left major spoilers intact. Gave up a few tasty little tidbits towards the middle of the book, but you could still read the book or watch the show after listening to us prattle on about it. I kind of feel like with Ready Player One, more of the story will probably be spoiled for people as we get through that book. But if you would like to join us, Andrew will be reading Ready Player One for the first time, and I will be rereading Ready Player One. And if you pick up those books now, at the end of next month, we'll talk about that. And I think we should also revisit both Altered Carbon and Ready Player One for just our takes on the adapted media. You know, if we want to do. When Andrew, when you finish the Netflix show, let me know. And I think we should do another sort of interim episode before we get through Ready Player One.
Oh, absolutely. Because I'm, especially starting it today. I'm wanting to get through it. Especially, I want to get through the show as I have the book fresh in my mind. as well too. So yeah, absolutely. That's I'm excited to get through it because it's what 10 episodes.
10 episodes, yeah.
10 episodes. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I am excited to talk about the differences, especially for how many differences there are. I'm with between the show and the book. I'm really excited to just flesh them out as they deserve.
Well, and I'll be really curious to see your take on some of the characters who make it into the show who have no book page time, screen time in the book. So we'll have some fun things to talk about. You know what? Keep an eye out on the SomeGadgetGuy website and the social media for the Geek Book Club. And once we get that pulled together, maybe we can also bring in. I know Annabong Etta from Board at Work, maybe even Lou, Board Buddha, might be wanting to join us to talk about the TV show, where it went, where they were expecting it to go, and how they felt about that story. I think that would be a fun conversation to have a little roundtable discussion there. And then also, just again, to reiterate, you should check out Ready Player One next month so that we can all get that together. Board Buddha says he's in, and he says that Ready Player One is 2 hours and 18 minutes long.
Oh,
so
there you go. Also, I was going to say, you want to make sure to support your local libraries. Yes. I would definitely go and check it out now. Check out Ready Player One now, because I just tried to check it out, and yep, it's on hold. It's on like 3 holds at my library right now. So I would definitely go check it out and see if you can get a copy before, especially by the time if you pick it up in March. There's going to be a high demand for it, I'm sure. So
yeah. Well, and especially with it coming out with the movie coming out at the end of the month, I kind of feel those people who are like us, if you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, will probably start trying to get, if you're a library fiend, and we wholly recommend supporting your local libraries. If the closer you get to the release of the film, the harder it's going to be to get this book. I have a super worn, it's actually over there, it's just outside, just out of reach. I have a super worn paperback that I've lent to several people, and thankfully it made its way back to me in time for me to reread it. Nice. So that's what we're going to be covering for March on the Geek Book Club. And I like this idea. I'm excited about this idea of trying to do some supplemental Geek Book Club podcasts on adaptations, getting some other content out for you fine folks. Of course, you can help us out with sharing the show with your friends who might want to join an online or virtual book club. You can always join the discussion. You can hit us up on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Just look for the Geek Book Club. Not just any Geek Book Club, the Geek Book Club. That's where you're going to find us around the interwebs. And of course, we will have links below the episodes that you can support production on the show, including checking out Audible. Maybe you're into the audiobooks, and we have a link below our show notes, where if you sign up for an Audible account, you can get your audiobooks. I think you get 2 free audiobooks the first month you sign up. If you decide to quit after that, you still keep your audiobooks, but they kick us a little cut just for talking about them. So it helps us keep content like this produced on the internets for all our hosting and podcast sharing and RSS feeding and all that stuff. But we more than anything else, we just hope you'll enjoy the discussion. You'll enjoy the books that we pick to read. You'll suggest some fun books to read, and that you'll share the show with your friends who also enjoy reading novels of the geeky variety.
Indeed. And it turns out, if you guys have any books you want to suggest to us, take a picture of them and tweet it at us at # the Geek Book Club. We're always open to suggestions. And we're always open for discovering new books that neither of us have had exposure to. So yeah, absolutely, join in the community, and yeah, we're interested to hear from you.
Definitely. And of course, just for us personally, if you want to harass Andrew, you can find him on Twitter as @FatProduce, where he is also the keeper of the Star Trek GIF. I think that's why I became such a good friend of yours, is because no matter what I tweeted, you always had the perfect Star Trek GIF to reply with. And when you're done harassing Andrew, if you'd like to have a civil conversation with me, you can find me online as at SomeGadgetGuy. The Geek Book Club will be back at the end of March. Recording date to be decided, but we'll work that out soon so that we can post that so you know exactly when we'll be broadcasting, hopefully in the next couple days, and you'll know when the show goes live. So be on the lookout for that. I want to thank everyone for joining us. All the people in the live chat, from Danny, Mary P, Victor, Stephanie, Board Buddha, Victor. I probably said Victor twice. So, and Victor Gill and Victor was also in the live chat. So you want to look out for Victor. But some great conversation happening there, and it helps us keep the show feeling pretty fresh, like this is a real conversation happening with you guys.
Yeah, so, thank you guys.
Definitely appreciate that too. We'll catch you guys next month with Ready Player One. And I think we'll also plan that field trip to go see the movie too. So be on the lookout for that also. And yeah, we'll catch you all on the next episode of the Geek Book Club.
See you guys.
And don't forget about Victor. Victor was an important part of this month's chat. And Victor says, and me.
Yes.
Don't forget me. And now I'm going to push stop. And I think the show is over.